Hi, this is Robert Colquhoun, Director of International Campaigns.
Por la vida en Colombia está lleno de frutos.
Geschlossen und manche dann sagen, ja, es ist nicht mehr selbst.
People start saying that, if your thoughts fall foul of the popular opinion, that they're somehow criminal.
Mi hija ha decidido no abortar.
Our freedom in a democracy, in our open society, begins with the freedom of speech.
Ante todo, los pilares de 40 días, ¿no? La oración, el ayuno, la yoga.
So sometimes it's just a little thing that we have to do. So
también dignidad, que son creados también por
But
Dios.
beyond what we say, anything we do at 40 Days for Life, anything we say to defend the unborn, we do with love.
Los bebés no tienen que ser abortados de una madre.
40 Days for Life International Podcast.
El podcast de 40 días por la vida internacional.
Hi, this is Robert Colquhoun, Director of International Campaigns for 40 Days for Life, and welcome to the international website. Do go to 40daysforlifeinternational.com, like, share and subscribe to our channel, and also we're doing many interviews now, and we're really blessed today to have the one and only Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, who is the founder of March for Life UK. She is also the leader of 40 Days for Life Birmingham. She's led an incredible campaign in Birmingham for over a decade now of prayer vigils outside the abortion centre. She also saw the abortion centre close in Birmingham, the Colquhoun clinic. And not only that, the surrounding referral centres also closed from MSI Reproductive Choices. Seen over 100 lives saved from outside the abortion centre from a decade of public prayer and ministry. Not only that, Isabel's risen to prominence internationally recently with her arrest by the police for simply praying silently in her head, and the international furore of a thought crime, the Orwellian existence of a thought crime recently has been huge international news. Everywhere I travel, many people speak about this case. Isabel, it's a real privilege and honour to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
well, thank you, Robert, for that. That was a grand start up. Yeah, lovely to be with you.
We've known each other for well over 10 years. How did you first get involved in the pro-life movement, and what was the kind of first thing that you did? I know you had Jericho marches in Birmingham on like a Saturday morning for many years. How did you get involved in pro-life activities for the very first time?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so I've always been pro-life. In fact, I often say I think it's the natural default position of any child, unless you're taught otherwise, to disregard the humanity of the child. So thankfully, I've always been pro-life. Particularly in my teenage years, I was reading a lot of stories about the Second World War, and clearly that brought out the worst in a lot of people. But the flip side of that is that you saw the great heroism that there was in the Second World War. Particularly in the sort of autobiographies, the stories that I'd be reading. And naturally, as I was reading, I'd be kind of thinking, what would I have done if I'd been in those situations? And I guess there wasn't an aha moment, but I just gradually sort of began to realize that wasn't the right question, that it wasn't a case of what would I have done then, or the only way to know what I would have done then is to ask myself, well, what am I doing now? Because clearly that there's a battle on. And to start with, I wasn't sure where to go with that. So I would be praying about the issue. I'd be donating to pro-life causes. There weren't so many petitions around then, but, just doing the little bits and pieces that I could, obviously reading a lot about it. And one day it sort of fell into my lap. There's a magazine called the Crusader magazine, which is a magazine that Maximilian Kolbe started many years ago. And there was a letter page on it, and a lady had written a letter in sharing her experience about praying outside an abortion centre. And that just got me interested. Crucially, she'd left contact details. To my shame, I can't remember who she is. But I'm very, very grateful to that woman, whoever she was, because I got in contact with her. She directed me to a group of people who were already praying outside the abortion centre in Birmingham. And I decided, along with my sister and one of my brothers, that we would go over there one Saturday and just join them. And that was just something that we decided to do as a one-off. We then kind of thought, we'll continue it as a sort of Lenten observance and go each Saturday during Lent. And I think that sense of peace that I got when I was there, which sounds strange because obviously the peace wasn't from the abortion centre. The peace was from knowing I was doing the right thing, knowing that was where I was meant to be. And so it continued after Lent. Just every Saturday there was a group who would pray for an hour outside the abortion centre. Nothing that organised at that stage, but just a few hours of prayer and offering alternatives to women, and things progressed from there.
And what was it like starting 40 Days for Life in Birmingham? You know, what have been the results? What have been some of the women you've helped, and some of the most interesting dynamics? You know, the kind of social interaction, the controversy, the meeting people at a raw, vulnerable moment, but also the grace, the beauty, and also how did you get involved in the very first time you went? How did you feel? What was it like to stepping outside your comfort zone? Tell us all the dynamics.
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, I mean, we've known each other a long time before I believe you were involved with 40 Days for Life. I remember our first meeting, I was sharing with you how at that time I was just praying outside abortion centres just on a weekly basis. And when I heard you'd started up 40 Days in London, because I already knew you, I thought, well, this must be something quite reasonable. Robert seems a reasonable person who shouldn't be doing anything too crazy. So that kind of piqued my interest. And when I saw the success of that, I thought, you know, could we replicate that in Birmingham? And I have to say, my initial thoughts were, how could we possibly get people for 12 hours a day, every day? Because we had, you know, we were lucky if we ever got double figures on a Saturday. You know, we'd have usually, half a dozen people just quietly saying their prayers once a week. So the thought of growing that to have 12 hours a day filled every day with, at least 2 people. But I remember you saying to me, don't limit God. And I took that seriously, thinking, well, if I do everything I can, then the rest is up to God, and I leave that with him. And we did do a lot of work. It was daunting, and it was spiritually really challenging. I really had to put my faith in God and really trust in him, as well as obviously doing my utmost. And there were some great people around me who supported me, along with my family, some university students who were really supportive. And actually 2 of those have gone on to become priests. One's gone on to become a nun. I think they felt really, spiritually helped by that campaign. Some of the women you've helped, because you've reached a lot of people and you've saved a lot of lives as well. Yeah. So I have to say that there's been so many people we've helped over the years, and so many lovely stories. I mean, just thinking about it, one that springs into my head is I remember when we were outside the abortion centre, a young man coming out, and obviously we tried to, ask if there was any help that we could give him. And he was saying to us that not really, he said, because, I already agree with you. I don't want the abortion, but it's what my girlfriend wants. I don't want to lose my girlfriend. So, I'm going along with it. And we said, well, is there any chance of talking to your girlfriend and maybe chatting to her about the support that's available? And he said, well, I'm going to go down to the shops and get something to eat. When I come back, I'll have another talk and think about it. So off he went. While he was gone, a young woman came out of the clinic, and she comes up to us and says, oh, have you seen my boyfriend? He came out here a few minutes ago. We put 2 and 2 together and said, yes, he's just gone down to the shops, but, could we offer you any help? Her response was pretty much the same as her boyfriend. No, you can't. I agree with you. I want to keep my baby, but I want to go along with my boyfriend, and he doesn't want this. So I'm going to have the abortion. Well, 2 minutes later, this guy comes back. And as you can imagine, we were saying, you two have got to talk to each other, tell each other what you just told us. And within minutes, they were hugging each other, that the expressions on their faces had totally changed. They couldn't believe that they were so close to having an abortion simply because they hadn't communicated. And I think that brought home to me how, sometimes we have to do an awful lot to help, for a woman to continue a pregnancy. Sometimes we have to do so little. It's just literally just turning up and, like on that occasion, getting 2 people to talk to each other. So sometimes it's just a little thing that we have to do. So beautiful stories like that. But also on the flip side, I would say what probably motivated me to start going outside abortion centres was recognising the humanity of the child in the womb and the injustice of that. But I'm sure, like you, after having done that for many years, you realise, the magnitude of how this affects women. Obviously as men as well, but I suppose you recognise more directly how it affects women when you're seeing them going in and coming out of the abortion centre. And I remember the very first time I was there as part of 40 Days for Life, a young woman going past on the other side of the street and just saying, what are you doing there? And when I explained, she just said, why weren't you there last week? Because if you'd been there last week, I wouldn't have had my abortion. And those stories also really motivate me. Yeah, to encourage women to get that healing they need. Obviously we want to reach them before they've had the abortion, but it's not too late for them if they haven't. It's too late for their child, but we can still help them get that healing. And that's just as important to me.
Now, you were once giving an interview in your car and you were getting heckled while the interview was going on with the radio. Is that right? That was absolutely brilliant. Can you remember that story?
I do, Robert. Yes. I probably prefer not to. I remember it was a BBC radio station, and they phoned up and asked if I could do an interview the next day, and they had a set time, and it was when I was supposed to be outside the abortion centre. But I thought, well, it's not a problem. The abortion centre's closed. There's someone else there. I'll just step to one side and do the interview on the phone. As chance would have it, the last minute, the person who was on with me cancelled because they were sick. So I thought I'll get into my car and do the interview. I'd left the signs that we had standing outside the abortion centre, which just said, we need help or telephone number and stuff on. As I was on the phone giving this interview, I looked in my wing mirror and I could see a guy trying to steal all these signs, and they were big, like A-frames. They weren't just like little flimsy things. Of course, I jumped out of the car on the phone. And I kept having to I was on this phone, half speaking to the guy on the phone, and then turning away to talk to this guy that was trying to steal the sign, saying, give me back my posters. And obviously the guy on the end of the phone wondered what on earth was happening. I had a bit of a tug of war. I won, got the posters, and this guy said he was going to go off and phone the police, which I said I was quite happy for him to do. And I got back into the car again. And a few minutes later, it starts up again. This time, the guy is trying to open my car door and throw the posters in on top of me. By this time, the poor chap on the phone who's trying to interview me is so worried about what's happening because he can hear this guy screaming at me that he actually stops the interview. So afterwards, when I'd sorted all the issue out, I phoned back the radio station to apologise. He was quite thankful because I think he wondered what on earth had happened, And as I was driving home that day, I had the radio on and I kept listening to these little snippets. They kept replaying what had happened. They obviously thought it was the highlight of their day that they'd caught this interaction live. They kept going, earlier today, this is what happened. And then you'd hear kerfuffle and shouting. And wasn't my finest moment. But,
that's hilarious. Pro-life multitasking, doing a media interview while being heckled at the vigil. So somewhere in the midst of organising 40 days, you started doing the March for Life up in Birmingham, and that started in Birmingham. And then as it got bigger, you moved the March for Life to London. It's on the 2nd of September 2023 this year, and it's now grown to one of the biggest pro-life event of the year in the United Kingdom. So tell us how the March for Life started and just some of the sort of background and history before sort of taking us up to the present moment.
Yeah, so, initially just a midway event for 40 Days for Life in Birmingham. So we just thought we'd get our volunteers to walk through Birmingham together. And I think there was probably about 100 on that day. And I think we recognised that this could be bigger and that we needed to maybe develop it into a national movement. So, we decided at that point it was best to just run this, simply as a March for Life rather than just as a midway event for 40 days and open it up to people from all around the country, all around the UK. And each year it just grew and grew. And whilst we had it in Birmingham to start with, at one point we realised that it was probably better to move to London, as well as being told that we weren't welcome to come back to Birmingham. So that gave us a little push. And we moved to London, and it's really thrived there. Last year, I think we had about 7,000, which was double the previous year. So a huge movement now. And whilst to start with, if I'm totally honest, we pushed the young people to the front for the photos. now, it's, as you know yourself, it's just flooded with young people, with families, students, people of all ages, all different denominations. We've got a group of dedicated atheists that come along, all sorts that come and join us, and it's a real day of solidarity in the pro-life movement now. And just want to recommend that 2nd of September, a little plug there. So if anyone wants to come and join us, we'd welcome people from wherever to be with us on the day.
You've got more of like a festival style sort of theme and approach of having stalls, having activities for children, but also you try and make the market a celebration of life as well. Tell us about the kind of logistical dynamics, but also the tone and ethos that you want to promote through both the march and the organisation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you've captured it quite well there, really. So in the morning, we have an indoor festival. We call it Life Fest. And like you say, there's all the pro-life stalls showcasing their work. There's sessions for children of all ages. There's talks, testimonies. This year, we're actually having some outreach training, so people can come in the morning, get trained in how to do outreach. Then they'll be teamed up with a coach to go out on the street with this sort of team leader. And while the march is on, they will be engaging with the public. So there's loads of stuff going on in the morning, as well as, of course, we have different prayer services. So there's a mass, there's an evangelical church service, there's an Anglican communion service, there's a service for those who are Orthodox Christians. There's all sorts of time to spiritually prepare. Like you say, the march itself, we try and create a sort of joyful feel for it as we celebrate the great gift of life. That is something that's quite contagious when people see that and they see the joy, and we know of people who have literally changed their mind about abortion because they were so touched by the joy of the pro-lifers, and that's like a great testimony to those who come along and really help foster that. But when we get to Parliament Square, that's where the keynote speeches are. We have a more solemn tone there, where we really reflect on the hurt and the damage that abortion has caused, and what that has really meant for our nation as a whole. So there's a lot packed into the day, starting from early in the morning and finishing at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Now, one of the first marches you did, there was a lady walking down the high street who was scheduled for an abortion, and she chose life. And then the following year, she spoke at the march. I remember, I've been to every year bar one. What was her name, and tell us about her story?
Yeah, so that was Sophie. In fact, she's already stepped forward to volunteer at this year's march.
Nice.
She's a regular supporter now, a lovely young lady. So as you say, she'd scheduled an abortion for, I think it was just a couple of days' time with BPAS, I believe, and was just doing her shopping in the city, and happened to see the March for Life go past.
Hundreds of pro-lifers just happened to pass by, which
absolutely. I mean, what big
little bit providential.
I don't know if you'd be praying for a sign that morning, but she certainly got one.
That'd be quite a sign, yeah.
Yeah, so I think she was touched, as I say, by the joy of the pro-lifers, and also there was a group of abortion supporters that day who were quite angry, and she said she really noticed the difference between these two groups, and she asked herself the question, what side do I want to be on? And she realized it was the side of life that she wanted to be on. That prompted her to go and talk to a young lady, Bernadette, who was somebody who's actually part of 40 Days for Life up in Sheffield. She talked to Bernadette, ended up staying and listening to all of the speeches that day, and went home, cancelled her abortion. And like you say, the next year she came back with her little baby boy, Riley. And I remember getting on stage, holding Riley and saying to everybody, who was here last year? It's because of you that Riley's here. And that, the tears in the crowd, you could just see the faces there. It wasn't a dry eye, I don't think. It was just so emotional, really recognizing the difference you can make by public witness.
Yeah, and of course, this is a controversial subject, and there's lots of people that disagree with us as well. One of the best years that you had was when you had lots of protests. You got so big in Birmingham that, lots of protests. And the last year before you moved to London, what was that year like? And, there's always many challenges when you try and do God's will and do God's work. Tell us about that year when you were quite heavily protested in Birmingham.
Yeah, I'm glad you thought it was the best year, because for me it was the most
probably the worst as the organisers. It's probably the worst. Yeah, you think everything's falling to bits, and everyone goes, "Yeah, this is absolutely brilliant," and it was pouring with rain, and everything was going wrong.
Yeah,
but that was the tipping point. That was the tipping point of moving to London, and then suddenly wow, all these opportunities open up.
Yeah, it coincided with the worst weather we've ever had. Like you correctly remember it, torrential rain. These protesters blocked our route, so we couldn't continue through the town.
They had smoke bombs as well, I think. Yeah,
they did. I remember a smoke bomb being set up in my face. I remember getting burnt in my face because of it. I laugh now. At the time, as I say, I was suffering from stress. The police came out in huge amounts. I remember the police, when we were blockaded effectively, the police saying to me, "You need to turn around and go back." And I said, these people aren't turning around and going back. This is a public right of way. And we had to wait a long time for them to get support. In the end, riot vans came in, and some of the abortion supporters were actually dragged off. Quite rightly so. Some of their posters were very abusive, very offensive. And I would say probably even a discredit to some of the abortion supporters. I mean, it was a load of thugs that came along on that day, if I'm quite honest. Thankfully, we've never had any, real problems since. I mean, we maybe get 20 people turning up and standing in a corner with some posters, but nothing like that. That, like you say, it really was a turning point. That was the last time we went to Birmingham. When we came to London, it's been quite a different atmosphere. Whilst there are some abortion supporters that turn up, to be fair, they've been reasonably civilized. Other than the couple of things I got poured over my head on one occasion, but other than that, they've been very civilized.
And outside Parliament, you're really safe. It's like the security's rock solid. I think, was it Birmingham Council in all their wisdom, they gave a permit for to have a protest in the same square at the same time, like a day before the event.
Absolute madness. The day before,
wow.
Like you say,
wow. And it took you months to get the permission, but then suddenly,
they told me they were going to split the square in half and have us half and half, and it was like,
wow.
Can you not see you're asking for trouble? And I think they learned a lesson that day as well. Thankfully, the Met Police in London are a little bit more savvy. And so they've handled things really well. And as I say, it's really family friendly now. We get loads of kids coming along and just having a whale of a time. So very different now.
And I mean, interestingly, spiritually, the time of our biggest test is actually a defining moment. So we can be thinking, this is terrible, this is a nightmare, this is chaos, this is a failure. And actually, that year, which was most heavily protested, the most amount of people have said, wow, that was a defining moment for us. This was something to fight for. This made us realize we were, waiting an hour in the rain for the march to continue while the police came along. This was a defining moment and everyone absolutely loved it. It's just an interesting dynamic. We can feel interiorly kind of empty and exhausted and, something's a failure, but God sees things from a different perspective. And, what we think might be a failure can actually be, our opportunity to witness in a really tangible and spiritually fruitful way.
Yeah, quite right. I think people said to me afterwards that they recognised how real the battle was on that day. Because sometimes, you don't really feel it. Yes, it might be hard doing the work, but on that day, like I said, the battle was literally brought out into the light. And I remember at the end of that day, just feeling so exhausted, thinking, is anyone ever going to want to come on a March for Life again? And this young man just came up to me, who'd been there, and just said, when's the next march? What can I do now? He was so fired up. And you could see he'd really got a sense of the, of this battle that we are in all the time. And I think, like I said, that had highlighted it for him and for many, like you said.
It woke him up. So tell us, when did you find out that the MSI, that's Mary Stopes Reproductive Choices Abortion Centre, was closing, like one of the oldest abortion centres in Birmingham, where you'd prayed for pretty much 10 years. How did you find out the news? Did the clinic staff tell you, or how did the story develop, and what did that feel like, actually seeing the abortion centre close?
Yeah, so like you say, that was the oldest abortion centre in the country. That was the first abortion centre to open after the Abortion Act in 1967 was passed. Originally a private clinic, and then became Mary Stopes. And there'd been people praying outside there almost since its inception, on and off. I'd been outside there for probably around 15 years, because quite a few years before 40 Days started. And, it just seemed to sort of go on and on in this sort of almost routine. Yes, we'd have, people changing their mind, but the thought of that place ever closing, I think at the time of its closure, it was the fourth busiest in the UK. So
Wow.
they'd had a caseload of 10,000 abortions a year.
Wow.
It was a really, really busy, thriving, if you can say that to do with abortion, business. You know, but on the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, patroness of the unborn, that's very specific to Catholics, 12th of December, the manageress came out and with a bag of donuts to hand out, she announced that the abortion centre was closing at the end of the year. And quite poignantly, she went to announce this to one of our very loyal supporters, a guy who had celebrated his birthday just a few days beforehand on the feast of Juan Diego, who again is very significant in that story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So particularly for the Catholics there, that was a very poignant moment and a lot of spiritual significance. And like you've mentioned, it wasn't only that abortion centre that closed down, but there was like a wave of MSI centres closing down across Birmingham. And interestingly, that happened just a couple of weeks or so after, if you remember, we'd got together as a pro-life movement and consecrated our work to Our Lady. So again, for the Catholics who'd been there, that was very spiritually significant. But, you know, we have a lot of Christians as part of our campaign from different denominations. They were equally delighted to see it close. And of course, that meant then moving on to the next abortion centre in Birmingham, which is, you know, where we're still working to close that one.
And you've had priests pray sort of every day during your campaign as well, kind of deliverance prayers or prayers. That's been really powerful, and you must have had a big party as well when the abortion centre closed. We did have a big party. Yeah, that was our best Christmas celebration yet. And yeah, this is something that I think it's really important to recognise the role of priests, you know, in the work that we're doing. And I think, you know, we'd always had priests who'd been supportive, you know, to start with, maybe not as many, but we've had more and more stepping up to help out. Yeah. And I think maybe helping them to see the specific role that they had, the unique role that they had that we didn't as laity. So as you say, when we've had a 40 Days for Life campaign, we've had a group of 7 priests. And they take it in turns each day to come to the abortion centre and perform what would be known as like a minor exorcism ritual. So it's not the same as when you're exorcising a person. Obviously, it's for the place, for the evil, to try and disperse that evil. And I remember the priest saying to me, you know, don't share this generally, you know, at the moment with your supporters. You know, some of them might not understand. Some of them obviously aren't Catholics and might not really, you know, appreciate the same as what we're doing. Just tell people that we're saying some prayers there. So that's what I did. I just shared that with my volunteers that you know, each day, you know, a priest would be coming to say some prayers at the abortion centre. And I remember the first day the priest went to do those exorcism prayers, very, you know, discreetly. There was a lady who was praying there, one of our volunteers, and she phoned me up after the priest had gone, and she said, "Oh, Isabel, you know, Father so-and-so came to say some prayers today." And I said, "Oh yeah, I thought he might come." And she said, "I don't know what he was saying," she said, "but it must have been powerful." She said, "When he finished praying, it was like all hell broke loose." She said, "People came screaming out of the abortion centre. Passers-by stopped and just started going berserk." And I thought it was interesting that she didn't know what he had done, but she just recognised the effect of it. And we very much have noticed the sort of spiritual battle go up a notch since that has started. So I definitely, you know, encourage priests to do that. You know, we had the support of our diocesan exorcist who said, yes, this is quite definitely a really good thing to be doing. And as I say, the spiritual fruits have also been really, really strong. Just to clarify on that, you know, a personal confession is more spiritually powerful, and it's simply just a few sort of set prayers. It's not like the sort of film The Exorcist or anything like that. But what you're talking about is really people waking up and realizing the spiritual significance of abortion, but also tangibly, like the guy in the rain at the march, you know, realizing this is a spiritual battle, and then waking up to that, and then waking up to the power of prayer. And even with priests, it's just saying, you know, just set formal prayers. You know, this is really powerful. And, you know, if we wake up and realize our spiritual greatness, this is the essence of what you're talking about. And this is what 40 Days for Life is all about. It's like we can change things on the local level if we recognize who God is, who we are, the things that we can change, the things that we can't, and the knowledge of the difference.
Totally. Absolutely, yeah. Robert. Yeah, with you on that.
Yeah. What kind of relationship have you got with the residents of Birmingham? Is it a love-hate relationship? Well, it must be an interesting time with some of the residents.
Well, it depends which residents you talk to. So yeah, but very, very different. Obviously, we've had some people who've joined our campaign just, locally from seeing us and have stopped initially just to pray with us and then, continued as part of our campaign, which has been really encouraging. Where we are now with the abortion centre, what we are now, we've had, quite a bit of negativity stirred up. But I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, I know some people might be familiar with a new film that's been released, The Sound of Freedom, which is, starring Jim Caviezel. It's about, trafficking of children. It sounds like a very harrowing but powerful film. And one of the things Jim Caviezel was saying when he was talking about the film, he was saying when he was offered the role, I think Tim Ballard was likening it to a certain extent to the story of Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. And Jim Caviezel was saying, that Schindler's List was a really powerful film, but it was 50 years too late, and it's, when I think of, with like things like Auschwitz and some of those prison camps. Yeah. When they were liberated, the people were asked who lived nearby were made to go and walk, through the prison camps because they had known it was happening and they'd just been bystanders effectively. And again, that was good for them to have to do, but it was a little bit too late. And what we're trying to do is wake people up to something that is still happening now. And that's why in a way, it's good, even if you start seeing residents or locals getting angry, because they are wakening up to what is happening on their doorstep. And it's not surprising that there's some anger amongst some of them. Some of them have been through abortion. Some of them are in a state of denial. Some of them are very hurt by this issue. So I think it's important not to get too distressed at seeing the anger or the upset or whatever it might be caused. This is actually good, and it shows that people are waking up to the evil that's happening in their towns, which is exactly what we want. We want people to do that while it's still happening and while they can still turn the tide.
And St. Thomas Aquinas says the first reaction to truth is anger. And, I've always been like nice person and, upset somebody. Oh, I don't want to do that. But I've learned with abortion that, this is a highly emotive subject. And there are a lot of people who have strong feelings about abortion, either for or against. And, when you encounter anger, there's also holy anger. God can use and channel anger into righteousness and good as well. So, maybe that is a normal emotional reaction. Imagine being told that you've been lied to your entire life and that you realize the truth for the first time. I think, a normal emotion reaction is astonishment or anger. And that can be something good. And it can also be God stirring somebody's conscience. It can be stirring up their heart. Also, somebody can bury an abortion experience right deep within them for 20 years. And you standing in the street with a sign is that it might be the first time that somebody shared an abortion experience in their whole life. And, there's going to be some raw emotional feeling as part of that. So I recognize anger as sort of part and parcel of the abortion debate. It's something natural. It's a normal human reaction. And, not to balk from it, but actually say, hey, well, maybe God's stirring this person's heart. Maybe they're a nutter and they're just crazy and angry, but it might also be God stirring somebody's heart. So there can be a whole range of reasons why somebody's angry. But actually, we're here to change the culture, save lives, reach out to post-abortive, and there's a lot of raw emotions with that. So what are some of the most challenging reactions you've had from residents? They've tried to ban you, they've campaigned against you, what and also probably for, just threatening as well. You've seen the whole spectrum of responses, haven't you?
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people who've taken part in 40 days have at some point seen some of these sort of responses. As I say, at the abortion centre, we used to pray outside. The response wasn't so passionate from the locals, but in this particular place, I think because this abortion centre has been opened for nearly as long as the other one, around 50 years, but has been largely uncontested. And so from a spiritual perspective, this evil had just been, rampant around the whole area. And now, as you can imagine, 12 hours a day, there's people devoutly praying there. Of course, there's, things have come to a head, and that's not surprising. And so we have seen quite a clash there. Interestingly, the abortion centre is at one end of the street, and we've got a church at the other end of the street, and it's literally like a line's been drawn. In fact, it has been drawn with a PSPO, part way down the street, and it's like, I sometimes think of those old westerns where you'd have two cowboys facing each other, with their hands over their holsters. It's a bit like that, with the opposing ends of the street of the good and the evil. And people are quite literally deciding which side they're on. You've got some residents coming and saying, I'm with you. There were signs put on cars saying, 93% of the residents hate you. And the amount of people that would come past and whisper to me, I'm part of the 7%. I think it's actually a lot more than 7%. Yeah. I think, as I say, it's good. It's making people choose their sides, which is ultimately, from a spiritual perspective, what we do have to do. Are we on the side of good or evil, of right or wrong? And that line has been drawn.
So you had the abortion centre closure in Calthorpe Clinic in Birmingham, and then you moved to a new abortion centre. I think it's the Robert Clinic, if I'm correct. And then the PSPO came in. So the Public Space Protection Order, in essence, the buffer zone came in, was introduced in Birmingham. And then you've been arrested once and a second time as well. What was that experience like? And tell us the background of this story. And it's made international headlines all around the world. Tell us the story from the beginning.
So firstly, apologies for anyone who's sick to death of hearing about this, because I've been it quite a few times. But as you say, the residents stirred up a lot of trouble, at least some of them did, and encouraged the council and the police to sign off this PSPO. And I just say that because some people say, it must be very difficult for the police trying to implement some of these rules. And they do have to sign off a PSPO for it to come into effect. So, they did sign it in. And part of the wording of that, of course, was to say that counselling and prayer as forms of protest were banned. I thought, I would think logically, clearly my silent prayers can't be banned. That's my most basic right, really, as a human, to be able to think what I want. So I went into the abortion centre zone, this buffer zone. And it was actually when it was closed to start with. I went 4 times when it was closed and just silently said some prayers near the abortion centre. I was arrested for that. I was taken to the police station, locked in a cell for quite a while, quizzed about what I'd been thinking about, and eventually had to go to court with that. And I was completely acquitted, alongside a lovely priest, Father Sean, who was also being tried for a similar conviction of having a pro-life bumper sticker that said unborn lives matter. He was completely acquitted as well. So naturally, I thought, having been acquitted, obviously it's okay for me to go and silently pray near the abortion centre, which is what I did about 2 weeks later. And this time they sent 6 police officers out with a police van, and they quite clearly told me my prayers were an offence. I said to them I didn't think prayers, were offensive, particularly my silent prayers. All the more emphatic the response came back, they are an offence. And that was when I was arrested again. And I'm still waiting to find out all these months later whether that's going anywhere, whether I'm being charged or not.
And the response you've had, sort of international response, there's lots of people, this has fascinated people from all around the world, the idea of a thought crime, the analogies with, George Orwell in 1984 of somebody praying silently in their head how this possibly could be a criminal offence, but you have it in effect it's exposed the sheer ludicrous nature of criminalizing, silent prayer is so draconian that it's quite scary, and it really demonstrates the true spiritual nature of the battle that we're involved in. So, have you been surprised by the response? Was that a big surprise, or was that something you expected?
Yeah, I think, like you say, it really has highlighted the discrimination that we know has been present in various forms in society for a long time against pro-lifers. Because just to clarify, I wasn't I wasn't, taken to court because I'd been thinking about abortion, but because I'd been praying. That was specifically what I was asked about. What were you praying for? So, that's clearly targeting those of us who've got religious beliefs. So if I'd just been thinking about abortion, it's very questionable whether I would have ever been arrested. But because I said I was praying about it, suddenly, it became this criminal concern. But like you say, I've been overwhelmed with support from people all around the world, and just really humbled by it, to be honest, Robert. The amount of people who've got in touch, written letters, just sent lovely messages, people who've said, I'm not religious, but I support your right to pray. And people who've equally said, whilst they actually agree with abortion, they do recognise that I've got a right to be able to stand there and pray about it on a street, which are quite right to do. People, I think, have realised, how far-reaching this could be if people start saying that, if your thoughts fall foul of the popular opinion that they're somehow criminal, then anybody could be the next target. And we do need to make sure that this is nipped in the bud and doesn't get any worse, because it has really serious implications.
It's like we're in the crosshairs of cancel culture, and but one of the most interesting dynamics is the amount of good that comes from an event such as being arrested in such a way that it's awakened the consciences of people around the world. It's galvanized discussions and many grace-filled responses. And you just say the prayer and the goodwill that you've received from people around the world. This is how God can use something bad for a tangible good. And we see this time and time again in the abortion debate of how God can use different circumstances for his greater glory too.
Absolutely. The scripture itself tells us, doesn't it? No weapon formed against us will prosper. And this is recognizing God's work in all of this, his permissive will, that he even allows the evil because he knows that greater good can come out of it. And I've definitely seen that. The opportunities I've had to share the pro-life message that I wouldn't have otherwise had. I've had a lot of young people who've said they felt really fired up by this issue now. Our campaign in Birmingham, we've got more people than we've ever had. So yeah, I do see the blessings, and that doesn't justify any of the wrong that's been done, which is atrocious. But at the same time, we needn't fear that, because, like you say, God will have his way, and I've definitely seen some huge blessings as a result of what has happened.
And there's quite a big analogy with the year of the March for Life, when it was protested the most heavily. Quite analogies with the arrest, actually, because at the time of our biggest trial, and when we think things are actually the worst and couldn't get any worse, and we're being challenged in the most extreme ways, this is a defining moment. It's a tipping point. It's a catalyst for change. It galvanizes more people than we ever thought possible. And just at the moment when we think something's collapsing or breaking down, that's the moment of transformation and change. So I think do you think that's a good analogy between the most challenging and testing times?
Very much. I think when those times happen, it's very easy to kind of see that there's a fork in the road, and are we through fear going to back down, or are we going to stand firm? Like I say, when we'd had these problems with March for Life, it would have been easy to throw the towel in. Well, it would have been easy from one sense. It wouldn't have sat well with my conscience. But from a practical sense, it was almost like, this is just becoming so hard. Let's call it a day. And similarly, I could sympathise with that way of thinking, with the buffer zones coming in, and it becomes more and more challenging to hold 40 days for lives here. And I'm sure people have their own obstacles wherever they are, the apathy that we face and all these other things. But, if we do stand firm, the results are just incredible. That the harder it becomes, the more blessings are raining down on us. And I've just grown spiritually so much through 40 Days for Life that I owe it a lot.
And the challenge is part of the journey. Like often we can think, oh, we're doing something wrong because we're being challenged. But, God doesn't write in straight lines. It's through the persecution, through the challenge, through all the trials that we have, this is how we grow spiritually, and this is how we develop into the people that God wants us to be, but also, to be on his journey and ending abortion in the way that he wants it to be ended.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's really valid.
Yeah. And what kind of international interest have you had from the arrest? And, you mentioned messages from all around the world, and you've traveled a lot as well, Ireland, Hungary. It's opened up many opportunities for you as well.
It has, and I think that this is a really important aspect of the abortion debate, that one of the key things we want is we want dialogue. If we want abortion to be unthinkable, the paradox is that we need to get people to think about it, and we do that through conversations, through talking about it. It was a bit like, and I'm sure you recognise this, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, suddenly a conversation opened up over here that we hadn't had before. People started talking about abortion, and equally, I found that with the situation with my arrest, it actually gave me an opportunity to talk about the issue, and that is a big step in this battle, because we know that we are on the side of truth, of being of reason, of rationale, of goodness, but we just sometimes don't get a chance to share that. But if we do get, whatever kind of a platform, it might just be a one-to-one conversation we have with our neighbour who's read about something. So for me, it could have been slightly embarrassing, because my issue of my arrest was in my local papers. People, saw this and knew that I'd been arrested, which obviously I wasn't particularly joyous about. But it did give me that opportunity to talk with them about what the reasoning was behind that and what had happened. And I was surprised at the support I received from people who aren't particularly passionate about this cause, who probably would say that they've got their foot in both camps, that, aren't particularly pro-life or pro-choice, not really sure where they stand. But it gave a chance for a conversation to start, and me to be able to share something of the truth with them. So I think, as always, let's use these opportunities to speak about the issue and start that conversation. Just be ready to grab it when it comes.
And, buffer zones is all about shutting down the debate, silencing one side of the abortion debate and preventing them from thinking, having freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. And this, arrest opened up the opportunity to speak about, probably more coverage than, any other story we've had in recent years. I remember Bernadette Smith, when she got arrested in Northern Ireland, she mentioned, she was on trial in the courtroom, and, in the area she had in the courtroom, she was praying for unborn children, and, think of them being on trial, if they're scheduled to be aborted, and that she was witnessing for the unborn children through being there in the courtroom, and that they don't have a voice, but we do have a voice, and we're the hands and feet, and our voice can be defending the unborn with our actions, with our words, and even in the kind of being arrested, that there's that opportunity to witness too.
Yeah, I remember that when I was being interviewed by the police at the police station, they were asking me, what have you been praying about? Obviously, it was tempting to think, well, I'm not obliged to divulge that to you. But I thought, again, this is an opportunity to witness to these officers. They're human beings. They've obviously got an opinion somewhere about this, or, and I talked about, the people I'd been praying for who've been hurt by abortion that I knew, and it was a chance to share some of those testimonies with the police officers. I've got no idea what impact or any if that had on them, but it is just using these opportunities how and when they come in, and letting God do the rest.
Yeah, it's that's our opportunity to witness is all the time, every time, including to police officers who've arrested you. We've had police officers in London, and they've been crying. They've been post-abortive women who've been police officers as well. We never know how God can use our words, our witness, and when we're standing in public, God can use us in the most powerful ways. We can think, what are we doing? We're crazy, or but actually God can be using us really tangibly, and God really, Isabel's used you so tangibly, so powerfully. What's your opinion of the status of where things are in the UK with regards to the abortion debate? We've had pills by post legalized during COVID. There's been attempts at decriminalization as well. Abortion's legal up to birth in the United Kingdom, and up to 24 weeks for those without disabilities. Things seem bleak. Where do you see hope, and where do you see opportunities for the pro-life movement?
Yeah, so I think, like you say, it is important to be realistic. At the moment in the UK, things are in a really dire situation, and from a a practical sort of, human perspective, things aren't looking at getting any better. They're trying to push to bring in decriminalisation, to bring in these, buffer zones outside every abortion centre, and think things are very challenging. But thankfully we've got the great gift of faith. But one of the things I do think about is I remember when abortion was voted in the terrible referendum in Ireland, when they voted in abortion there. Yeah. And afterwards they asked people why they voted for abortion, why they voted as they did. And an incredible amount of people said they voted as they did because of emotional stories they heard. And I think, well, actually, the more, sadly, the more the abortion law carries on like it is, as liberally as it is, the more stories there will come out of women who have been hurt by abortion. And I'm seeing more and more of these stories coming out, people sharing, women and men sharing their stories of pain. And I think these are things that will affect people. And sadly, with the abortion pills at home that we have, women are recognizing even sooner how hurtful, how painful abortion is, because they are actually, they're seeing their dead child. You will remember, year before last at March for Life, we had Natalia who shared her story of a home abortion and how she looked down the toilet and saw her child, which she obviously wasn't expecting. She'd been told it was a blob of tissue, or the usual euphemisms. And yet she could no longer deceive herself because she'd seen it with her own eyes. So I think with the more of these stories coming forward, the people having that healing that they need to, but then be able to carry on and share their stories with organisations like Rachel's Vineyard that, help anyone who's been hurt by abortion. When they've been through that healing and are then able to share their stories, this is a powerful weapon that we have in being able to highlight what really goes on in abortion. Let the women themselves tell their stories. Let the men share how it's affected them. It's sad that's how it has to be to help change it. That can be a huge force for the good. And I think the more we encourage people who've been through abortion to join our movement and be a vital part in our movement, that is going to be a massive step forward in changing the tide.
Yeah, getting people to make the emotional connection with abortion. Some people have had abortions, some people's friends have had abortions, or they've got relatives, or they help somebody have an abortion. For many others, it might be an abstract issue, but if we can emotionally connect with the issue and also help other people to emotionally connect with what abortion is, what abortion does, the results, the consequences, the emotional, spiritual hurts, but also the opportunity for healing, as you mentioned, Rachel's Vineyard as well. If we can really get, supporters, donors, others to really connect with the issue and they understand what it is, what it does, the spiritual scope of it and the scale, I think that's when we can have a breakthrough, and that's when we can connect with others. You had Danny and Carla also shared their testimony at the March for Life as well, and they were going for abortion, weren't they? And then they changed their mind at the last moment.
Yeah, that was a real blessing to meet them that day, and something that really touched me personally was because to get to the abortion centre, I have to travel about an hour. It's quite a long way from me, and I remember talking to Danny that day, and he was going something to the effect of, you won't be able to help us. We live a long way from here. We don't live around Birmingham. And I said, that doesn't make any difference. But out of interest, where do you live? And they were a few streets from my house. It was just such a personal story, that one was. And so lovely, to still be in contact and to have seen their little girl growing up. It's really important that we share those stories as well, because they equally touch people's hearts. Yes, it's important to have the facts and to help develop people's minds and educate on this issue. But sometimes, like you've just rightly pointed out, we can sometimes focus too much just on the facts, because we know that science, we're on the side of science, and that, telling that is an absolute truth. We also do need to look at engaging people emotionally, and those sort of stories that, the joyful stories, people like Amrita, again, who shared a story at March for Life of taking the abortion reversal pill, and her lovely little girl that was born as a result of that. Hearing those stories touch people and help them realise the great gift of life, and how these people's lives didn't fall apart afterwards, how these children weren't curses, that quite the opposite, that they really blessed and fulfilled these women afterwards, and the couples.
Yeah. Who's the best pro-life speaker you've ever heard? You've had, hundreds of speakers come through the march and other events. Who's been the one who's really sort of struck out for you as the most influential or powerful?
I have to say that's an incredibly difficult question because I just think there's so many different areas. So like we've just said, there's some people who will be maybe really good at, talking intellectually, academically about this subject. There's people who are great at talking about apologetics, but then if you ask them to share their personal story, they wouldn't know where to begin. But equally, there's people who've got incredible personal stories that have just really, motivated me emotionally. So I think, for each of those categories, there'd be a different person. I can think of like somebody who's like a really great, testimony, somebody who's just a real great motivational speaker, somebody who, like I say, scientifically really helps open up the issue. One of the things I guess I would say is that I think sometimes, particularly, in this debate, the abortion debate, there can be a tendency to kind of push women forward for speaking. And absolutely, I've heard some fantastic female speakers. I'm not going to start naming them because I'll forget somebody key. But the amount of great female speakers there are. But I think of the amount of males speakers that have over the years really helped form my mind and my heart, and I owe them a lot. And I think that's a good reminder to how important the male voice is on this subject, which of course is something that the other side is constantly trying to silence. And yet, the more men speak up, the more we realise this is an issue that affects them as well. Yes, it's a human rights issue, so that gives everybody a right to speak on it. But it also affects men very personally. Just recently I was talking to a man whose children had been aborted. He'd been part of that, but you could really see how much he was affected all these years later. We sometimes think of it as a woman's issue, and that's really sad. It's because of that sometimes that women end up having abortions, because men are told you don't have a say in it. A pregnancy is just a woman's issue. And so men do sometimes step aside, and then women are left feeling very isolated. And that's when they choose abortion or feel that that's their only choice. So we really do need to encourage men to be part of this right from the beginning, from the moment of conception. And that means that they are very qualified to speak on this issue. And maybe I just kind of want to use this minute now to say thank you to all those great male speakers that I've heard that over the years have just really motivated me, encouraged me. Your voice is so important in this debate.
That's right. I mean, the pro-aborts want men to be silenced, and it's a women's choice. No, I think there was somebody had a sign once at the march saying no womb, no opinion. One of the male pro-abort activists.
Yeah, I remember that, Robert. He was standing, I remember coming into Parliament Square, and he was proudly standing near the stage with this sign above his head. And I went over to take a photograph, and he just looked even prouder holding the sign, like you say, no uterus, no opinion. And I remember sharing that on social media afterwards. It was the best shared photograph of the day. It just went viral.
Yeah.
But sadly, he was just invalidating himself with his comment. But
exactly. Yeah, I've had men come up to me and say, how dare you have an opinion? It's like, well, you've got an opinion as well. Like, by your own logic, it's like you're censoring yourself. So, but no, men have a vital part to play in the pro-life movement. And when men actually take a stand for women, for children, that's when things can really make a difference, and it's like that's a vital part, and when women feel isolated, feel alone, often men will say, you do what you think is best, and that can be interpreted by women as go and have the abortion. So it's like, we need to empower men. We need to get them to realize that they have an important part to play in this debate. And we've seen many men outside abortion centres, and some of whom that's been a defining moment, and they've stood up and helped to save the life of their child. So, absolutely, men have such a vital part to play in the abortion debate as well. If you had a message, what message do you have for 40 Days for Life leaders and volunteers around the world? You've seen your clinic close. You've been challenged in the most challenging way, being arrested, etc. You've had a buffer zone. You've seen so much, and you've got a national march started as well. What message do you have for leaders and volunteers around the world?
I think I could only give the same sort of advice that I give myself, which is to keep viewing today in light of eternity. You know, when I think about the excuses that I'm tempted to make to myself, you know, like I don't want to get out of bed that hour early to get to the abortion centre because I'm tired, or you know, when I'm maybe struggling to find the courage to talk to a woman going into the abortion centre because I'm fearful of what response I might get or that I might be ignored, or I may be struggling to motivate myself to, you know, invite somebody from my church to come and join us or something like that. When I view that in light of eternity, and I imagine on one day, you know, it's going to be me and Jesus across the table on Judgment Day, face to face, and I'm going to have to give those excuses to him, they suddenly seem so pathetic. You know, that I was worried what this person would think of me. I would worry that somebody, you know, might ignore me, and I wanted an extra half an hour sleep. And when I realized that these things could have, you know, saved someone's life, could have changed somebody's life, I suddenly realized, like I say, how weak these excuses are. So I just kind of, I think that's what motivates me to try and think of the decisions I'm making, of what is going on today. You know, how will that look in light of eternity when I'm there with Jesus on Judgment Day? You know, what are those excuses? What do they really stand for? You know, so I guess that would be the kind of advice, if you like, because that's what I tell myself.
Also, thank you so much, Isabel. It's been a real privilege and honour speaking to you. May God bless all the things that you do, including the March for Life that's September the 2nd, including 40 Days for Life in Birmingham. God bless the witness. God bless for putting, you know, yourself on the line for the unborn. We're so proud of you as a leader, as one of the most prominent pro-lifers in the UK. May God bless everything you're doing. And thank you so much for this interview. Do go to 40daysforlifeinternational.com, review and share this podcast, and we'll be interviewing many more pro-life leaders and others who are involved in our campaign around the world. So thank you so much, Isabel. It's been such an honor and blessing speaking with you today. May God bless you. Thank you so much to our listeners, and look forward to sharing many more podcasts in due course. So God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
No te pierdas los podcasts de 40 días por la vida internacional con entrevistas, reportajes y testimonios de todo el mundo.
Don't miss our podcasts with interviews, news, and reports from around the world.